Hello, my name is John Dede, professor of political science at community colleges of Baltimore County and local political media analyst. Welcome to the Maryland State Politics and Government podcast on Substack. Today, I am talking with candidate for the 4th Council District in Baltimore County, Karson Kamenetz. Welcome back.
Thanks, John. Happy to be here. Love your content. Happy to be a part of it.
Glad to have you a part of it. First question I have to ask is, how's the campaign coming along?
It's going really well. We've been running for really over a year now, and there comes a moment in every campaign that I've worked on and been a part on where everything starts going in the right direction, and that's what we're feeling right now. We feel a lot of momentum everywhere we go.
And that's the key thing I've always found in campaign momentum. In the last few months since we talked, have there been moments where you've said to yourself, "What was I thinking?" Or a moment along the lines where, this went really well today.
Yeah, I mean that's the life of a campaign. There are good days and bad days, and your brain kind of likes to play tricks on you because there's no really uh, a sense of finality. You kind of do everything you can and hope it adds up to a win on election day. So definitely good days and bad days, that's for sure.
When you're running into people, not necessarily at events, but at the store and various places, what are people talking about as far as the big issues?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest issues I hear on every door, I hear it when people, stop me when I'm eating lunch sometimes at Jilly's, is reckless and aggressive driving. It's one of the largest issues in this district, particularly because there are a lot of neighborhood roads that really act as freeways for avoiding traffic and congestion on Reisterstown and Liberty roads. And that has a lot to do with how the county was planned and developed to start with. These side roads to avoid Reisterstown are lined with homes. And folks are saying, I don't even feel comfortable letting my children play out in the front lawn because of how many accidents I've heard in the middle of the night on my street, or how many times somebody has hit my mailbox speeding down Milford Mill Road or Winans Road. And it's a real problem. And when you add on top of the fact that we have a pretty serious police officer shortage, 300 officers that the PD is saying that they're missing to keep us safe. It really is a nasty equation.
Recently, it was on Baltimore Beltway. And normally I put two hands on the steering wheel when I'm driving in Baltimore City. I was a two hand, and it was like there were people weaving in and out. Is there anything that can really be done about this? The one thing I was thinking about when you talked about this is in parts of Delaware, what they did was they lowered the speed limits around Bethany, Rehoboth, along Route 1 and other roads. Instead of keeping it where it was, they decided to drop it 5 to 10 miles an hour.
Yeah, I mean, there's three different sectors to this, right? There are county neighborhood roads, there are state highways, and then there's, 695, 795, 83. Fortunately for those highways, the Maryland General Assembly passed a law that's going to install 14 speed cameras around 695 at some point. So hopefully that should help both keeping people slow, but also generating some more revenue at a time that we really need it. When it comes to the state highways, places like Liberty and Reisterstown Road, that's where we really have to get creative, partnering with our state allies and saying, what can we do to not just make it safer on these roads, but also more walkable, so folks can cross the street going from, say, Gillies to the Pikes or vice versa. And that means extending sidewalks, maybe doing something like Frederick Road where you can park on both sides of the road, and also just having something as simple as like a banner saying, "Hey, you're entering downtown Pikesville, for example. This is a lively village. Slow down." And then back to neighborhood roads. Each neighborhood kind of wants their own separate fix. Some want speed bumps or raised crosswalks. And to do that, you have to get 80 or 90% of your neighborhood to sign on to a petition asking for it. And others say, we just want these mobile speed cameras, things that will literally light up for any drivers and say, hey, you're going to get fined if you keep driving the speed that you're going. And again, that helps our revenue problem, and it keeps people safe in their homes and walking to the bus stop as well. So really, it's three different fixes for three different areas. And again, you really have to go to each neighborhood and figure out exactly what each community wants, because the last thing you want to do is try to solve a problem with a solution that folks don't agree with.
Talk about safety, and one issue that has come up a lot recently is what's going on regarding Towson Town Center. Uh, Maybe it's the beginning and the end of it. What can be done to kind of bring that back? Because, that when Apple left, people said, oh my God. Then people pointed out, well, that's not a big deal because it unionized. So that's the reason they're getting out. But it's still the public safety issue. I live in Anne Arundel County, and Marley Station Mall is basically you walk in and you can yell and hear an echo. And maybe the mall idea of 30, 40 years ago was great, but maybe it just needs to die. But people still want to go to the places like at Towson Town Center. It's still considered a center hub. What can be done to kind of bring that back?
Yeah, this is a serious issue. I mean, I saw a horrendous video of a number of young kids, frankly, jumping another. And it was heartbreaking to think about being the parent of the children at the bottom of this pile. And you have these team meetups and things like that all around Towson. And it's a tragedy because of what you just said. There is this perception that Towson is incredibly unsafe. And Towson is the county seat. That is our economic hub in many ways. So I think you deal with this from not only a public safety standpoint, but also an economic development standpoint. In Towson, although not in my district, we really need to bring everybody around there to the table, including Towson University, which is growing substantially, and saying, what can we do to turn this into a place that is thriving not just for Towson residents, but also as an almost college town where we can incorporate Towson University into these larger economic development plans. I don't think the mall is dead. Maybe I'm too young or young enough to be optimistic about this, but I was there recently to go to the Nordstrom Rack. There were people in the mall. I think there are 20 or 25% vacant at this point, and you can absolutely tell. But the reality is folks are still going there because there's yet to be another alternative. It's not like you can try on clothes at Nordstrom.com. Walking around the mall is still something enjoyable to me, and I know my mother, even my grandmother, and all my buddies as well. So I think we really just have to be intentional about what types of businesses we're thinking about bringing into the mall and that area. And I really trust Nancy Hafford, who is the who runs the Towson Chamber, in making sure we get the businesses back that we need to, and making sure that place thrives. From the public safety standpoint, that's where the answer is in my opinion, more police on the street. And to do that, we have to close the shortage. We have to recruit and retain more officers, meaning what do we have that the 25 larger police jurisdictions than us have that we don't, more so? And we get to cheat on this because the police department has told us they in Baltimore County are training officers by shooting at dirt piles right now. They don't have a training center, let alone one that is state of the art like the 25 larger jurisdictions. The county promised police department recruits even today that they get take-home cars, yet only X percentage of officers really get them. So we're providing an incentive to officers to come to Baltimore County on top of a bonus that doesn't really exist. It's really a false promise. So when it comes budget season, where you really are able to cut and amend as a reflection of your values and priorities, you're going to see me redirecting some of the lower priority or lower value budget items back into public safety, because I really believe it is a prerequisite to everything else we hope to achieve from an economic development standpoint, from an education standpoint. So we have to get serious. And that doesn't mean, 1990s New York City. It means maybe we put police on bikes around Towson Circle, around the mall, but just having a constant police presence. So especially our young people aren't thrown into bad situations. And again, public safety is a two-pronged a thing. We don't deserve to act surprised when our young people are turning towards negative influences, when we don't frankly have many around them that are positive. So we have to invest both in the actual police on the street, but also in youth opportunity, in inside the Beltway Rec Center that we are missing. Having these additional resources available that we could say to our kids, hey, maybe you should hang out over here. This is more fun and you'll stay out of trouble.
ties into my next question related to juvenile justice. Legislature recently made some changes, and I haven't met a state's attorney that likes it yet, as far as for charging juveniles, et cetera. And this kind of ties into a lot of stuff related to Towson, related to a variety of things in Baltimore County that are dealing with a lot of juvenile justice issues. How do you feel about the change in the legislation that they did in Annapolis, basically making it in some ways almost easier to charge everybody as a juvenile, but at the same time having to go through that issue as far as maybe they don't belong in juvenile court right away. Maybe they have to start out in adult court.
Yeah, I think this is one of the tougher issues, frankly, of our time. It's like, how do we find this middle ground between keeping people safe and respecting victims, and also understanding that the pipeline to prison exists, that our young people, once they're introduced to the juvenile justice system or the justice system broadly, aren't going to always escape it. It's just a fact. So how do we meet in the middle and say, hey, if you're doing a violent crime, you are going to go to jail. But at the same time, if you don't reach that level of violent crime, if it is a petty theft, something like that, how do we make sure you are really encouraged and in some ways maybe even forced to stay away from those negative influences again? It's a tough thing. I think at the end of the day, you have to respect victims. And if a kid is committing a violent crime, if they're 15 years old, I think that a slap on the wrist isn't going to go as far as legitimate rehabilitative punishment. Again, that's assuming that our criminal justice system is rehabilitative and not just punitive. And that's an entirely different conversation. It's a broader ideological discussion. But I think even folks on every side of this argument would agree that our prison system doesn't exactly rehabilitate. And in order to say to our kids, or to everybody around us, hey, our kids should be tried as juveniles and not adults, that presumption that they will rehabilitate is almost assumed for half the argument. And I don't think it can be assumed.
That's a good point. My next question deals with the issue that has come up a lot recently, and that is an issue of Inspector General power. This session, Senator Jackson tried to get legislation passed that would basically give the Baltimore County Inspector General the ability to kind of peek into what's going on in the Baltimore County public school system. The school system, let's be honest, it's a fiefdom unto itself. How do you feel about that? Do you think that legislation should come back and be passed next year to give the Inspector General more authority over the school system? What can be done so taxpayers can say, look, we're spending X amount of dollars on the public schools. I trust that it's being spent correctly.
Yeah. Almost $3 billion every year, about half our budget is allocated to the school system. Of course, 35% or so of that are grants from federal and state dollars. But at the end of the day, the goal of government is not just to spend taxpayer dollars, it's to make its constituency and residents comfortable and confident that their money is being spent in ways that don't include waste, fraud, or abuse. I think the history of Baltimore County from the Agnew days has really left a bad taste in people's mouths through today. There's almost a presumption of dishonesty and corruption. And I think the establishment of OIG in Baltimore County has absolutely said to folks, hey, maybe we're in the right direction. And I think absolutely it should be oversight over all of, every single dollar being spent in this county, because that is how you build trust ultimately. So yeah, I support, OIG oversight over our education dollars, because again, they're tax dollars. And if we're spending billions of dollars, I think our people deserve to say, hey, we feel confident in how they're being spent. Just as the IRS can say, hey, we're going to audit you to see if we are comfortable with how you have reported your earnings. So I think it's a mutualistic relationship in government, and it has to work both ways. So absolutely.
One of the issues that's come up among a variety of people when we talk about these races going on in Baltimore County, and people have even referenced it a little bit as far as the councilmatic districts. or another way people have described them is fiefdoms. Do you think that this should be changed a little bit more? Because it seems like what we have in Baltimore County currently is a county executive, and then almost like back to the days of the Middle Ages, we have seven separate feudal lords running each of their councilmatic different districts. Do you think there should be some sort of change in this process as far as for taxpayers and citizens?
Yeah, I think it doesn't matter who you talk to, whether it is the folks that want to come invest in this county or regular people that see projects and shovels hit the ground before they feel like they've been able to provide sufficient input of their own as to what they're looking for in their own communities. I think, the one thing in common everybody has is that this courtesy action, this unofficial councilmanic courtesy that basically says, hey, councilman in this district, I'll let you pass whatever you're thinking in your district development wise, as long as you come back and pat my back in return when I'm proposing something. I think that has to end. We have a master plan, and frankly, I don't even know why we do it because it's not always followed. It again turns into 7 and now 9 individual fiefdoms instead of one broader county plan for economic development. So I think we attack this systemically to forcibly remove this courtesy action. I mean, absolutely, we're going to have 7 out of now 9 brand new members on this council and a new executive. So that courtesy by default may not be there, but I think we systemically, again, have to attack this with legislation, saying, hey, you are required to fully analyze each of the pieces of legislation that come to your desk, saying, hey, you need X amount of votes, including a vote from the council member whose district the development is happening in to pass something. It's tough. It's a nuanced conversation, but when you look at things like Lutherville Station, where it's a project that checks all of the boxes on the smart growth checklist, saying, hey, this is where infrastructure already exists. This is by transit to reduce cost of living for folks that live there and to reduce its traffic impact on the neighboring communities. That's, it's concerning that we said, hey, even something like this isn't what we're going to allow in this county when we have a declining tax base, when we have a real need to generate more revenue, and when we have a housing problem to where our young people are struggling to get a foothold and our older adults are struggling to downsize in the communities they love. So, I mean, this courtesy stuff has got to end, and whatever it takes, frankly, whatever it takes.
Recently, I saw on social media where you received an endorsement for Councilman Izzy Patoka for your election to County Council. Do you have any preferences as far as making endorsements for the county executive race or the state's attorney's race? What are your thoughts on those races?
Yeah, I don't think it's my place. I think the voters should decide what they think is best. I'm incredibly proud to have the endorsement of the sitting councilman in this district, Izzy Patoka, and I'm proud of the wide range of ideological support that we've earned in this campaign. Folks from both parties, folks from both ends of the spectrum that have said, hey, we trust Karson. We know he has the judgment to turn, experience around him, folks that he's going to hire into good action, into growing this county again, into making sure our families feel safe crossing the street. So I'm really proud of our support. We've generated a lot of momentum in this campaign. But as to my endorsement for county executive, frankly, if you're looking at me for that type of advice, I think you should instead be going to the candidates' websites and seeing what you resonate more with.
One of the big issues that has come up regarding all the campaigns in general in Baltimore County is the issue of creating affordable housing. And often it centers around, we want affordable housing, but the NIMBY attitude, but not in my backyard, because people assume and take the attitude of affordable housing means cheap housing in good neighborhoods driving down values. How do you approach the affordable housing situation in Baltimore County to kind of get more people to move into the county and be able to grow the county's tax base?
Yeah, I think we absolutely need more housing, and too often this debate gets really muddied because the argument is either build everything everywhere and build nothing anywhere at all. And I reject both sides. And I think build more housing is just not a complete plan. We have a pretty detailed four-part strategy about what we're going to do to build more housing in a way that doesn't disrupt existing communities, or when it does, being really honest about what those trade-offs are and why we need more housing and how that will be a rising tide that sort of lifts all boats. And first is building in the right places. I don't think the county needs to be focused on where in our green space and beautiful 2,000 miles of streams and tributaries we need to have absorbed this pressure. I think we have incredible bones inside the urban-rural demarcation line within this third of the county land where we've designated for 60 plus years. This is where we're going to have the highest density. And right now, when you're looking along this Erdl, when you're looking at corridors along Liberty Road and Reisterstown Road, you see a lot of blood. You see a lot of what used to be. And again, great, great bones. So again, my step one is focusing not on new development, but on redevelopment and restoration along these key corridors, especially on underused commercial land, on aging strip and shopping centers, vacant properties, transit adjacent areas, TODs, because that's where the county can add the most units in a responsible way that doesn't negatively impact the quality of life of existing communities around there, as a high rise in the middle of Reisterstown Road would. And second is modernizing our playbook. Our zoning code hasn't been fundamentally reformed since this county was chartered, and the state passed a law enabling accessory dwelling units on a county level. And the Baltimore County Council has yet to adopt or implement this ADU legislation. So when we get in there, whether or not the current council has looked at this ADU stuff, I'm going to look at it again, and we're going to determine where ADUs are going to be most effective for these older adults that are telling me it's just getting too expensive to think about downsizing right now. Folks that are often on fixed incomes in this economic bubble where they make too much to qualify for traditional assistance, but don't make enough to cover those costs themselves, let alone to buy a new property or to downsize in a meaningful way. That's where our attention has to be from a zoning code perspective. And also, we need a more predictable permitting process. It shouldn't take 6 or 7 months for somebody to get a permit to build or modernize existing buildings for residential. It takes too long. And it says to investors, folks that want to put money into this county, you're better off going elsewhere because we're not going to respect your time or pro formas because of land costs and citizen suits and things like that. And then third is, again, focusing on those that are already being squeezed. Again, those on fixed incomes, young adults that are buying homes for the first time in a country where the average age of a first-time home buyer is now over 40 years old. I don't know about you, John, but my father's first home, I remember him telling me when I was 14, 15 years old, was a couple $1,000 down payment. And you look at today and it's not even close to keeping up with the rate of inflation. So I think if we can generate more revenue, I would love to, as a third part of this plan, give more help to first-time home buyers and also better disseminate home buyer assistance information, because often folks are leaving money on the table just because the process is too confusing. And then the fourth prong of this, and again, all of this is on my website, carsonforthecounty.com. You pair growth with infrastructure. Too often we think about building something before we think about the maintenance of what it takes to keep that building upright. And we see problems that occur because of that. And a great example is on Reisterstown Road. There's a building that everybody knows about. It's 600 Reisterstown Road, and the facade is ripped off. The garage underground is condemned. Yet there's nothing that the homeowner, the building owner, the property owner will do about it because the infrastructure underground is so poor. And that's a pretty big problem, especially along not just Reisterstown, but Liberty as well, where we're having water main breaks and other issues that, again, say to investors, hey, it's going to be more expensive than you thought to invest here in the county. So I think housing policy has to be tied to those four things. And that's how I'm going to operate, because otherwise the county is going to keep losing trust ultimately when it comes to growth and development. And I want to be clear also, the answer and the goal to this housing shortage is not growth at all costs. The goal is a legitimate housing ladder where, starting from high school graduation, people can see a path to a first-time home, to a family unit, and then to a place that you can live the rest of your life and age in dignity. That's the goal, because that's what other jurisdictions offer young people and older adults alike. But Baltimore County, time and time again, because of councilmanic courtesy, because of this constant fight between build everything everywhere, build nothing nowhere, we've fallen drastically behind even other counties bordering us on all sides.
One of the issues you brought up a little bit dealt with the permit process. I've heard Ed Hale talk about this. I've heard Democrats in other states talk about it, that we're trying to get rid of this permit problem. And Shapiro in Pennsylvania mentioned it, as far as we want to be the party that gets shit done. Basically, if you watch a lot of these flip and flop type of shows, the biggest problem it seems they have, and maybe it's because they're in California, is the permit process. What can be done to speed that up? Because I feel that is the biggest frustration for a lot of people, where someone has an idea, hey, I want to improve my property, and 6 months later, someone can finally take a shovel to it.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all is the actual online portal unique to Baltimore County. During COVID, there was a really quick change to or from almost a deli or MVA type process for permitting, where you would literally walk into the building and you'd go to each desk you needed to get sign-offs on what you needed. And if there was an issue, you could come back in a couple minutes or tomorrow. But now with the online system as it's been, if there is an issue, you have to resubmit the entire permitting, no matter how many steps there were for approval in all of those steps for a second time. And that, inherently is inefficient, and it's costly for taxpayers, because any of those land costs that developers and investors absorb while waiting for their permitting approvals just get shoved onto ratepayers. They get shoved onto rent payers, folks that are buying those properties. So this is a pretty clear problem in my mind. I don't like when people sort of gloss over this permitting issue. And you fix it by doing two things, in my opinion. One is, again, back to the zoning code, enabling by right development if you check all of the boxes ahead of time. If you submit paperwork saying, hey, we have mitigated the stormwater impact, we have accounted for traffic, we have sufficient amounts of open space, or for existing infrastructure and for redevelopment, saying, hey, we check all the boxes when it comes to parking minimums. And things like that. I think that would go a long way, not just for, again, investors in having confidence that this will even be worth their time, but also for folks that would then be buying into those properties, whether it's retail, housing, or commercial. And then second is the online portal itself. I'm a really big tech guy. I know the current council fairly well. They are not tech guys. I think having oversight over OIT and really holding them in front of you and saying, what can we do, or what type of system are you looking for that you believe will make this easier? And then going through a new RFP process to ensure that whatever online portal we use actually works and doesn't require a resubmission each time you miss a checkbox, for example. And it's also being honest with investors ahead of time, not slow walking, deals and saying, hey, I think we can get this done, to maybe we can get this done, to I don't know if this is going to work out. I think what investors have told me is that doesn't happen in other jurisdictions. You get a yes or no. So I think it's being honest about every part of the process as well. But permitting is a really important issue, and it's not a pretty issue. And I always tell a story about somebody who reached out to me, and I'm a candidate for office. I am not in office. And they explained to me how during this May storm last year, it was a horrendous storm, this massive oak tree punctured into their living room. And they grabbed suitcases and stuffed them and took their kid with special needs to hotel, to friend's basement, to hotel, really draining their savings, living out of this suitcase because the permitting department didn't yet give them a permit to repair their own roof for months. So there is okay, it's just the developers that care about permitting, but then there is the real world impact where this process, where this county cares so much about its process that we're sort of ignoring our people. So it's a real issue. It affects everybody. And having a good permitting system is akin, in my mind, to having a good insurance policy. You want to know the county is able to approve what you need when you need it, if you get to that point where an oak tree is fallen into your building. So it's tough. And I look forward to getting in there and surrounding myself with folks that have dealt with permitting for decades, and seeing what we can do to make that process more efficient generally.
We got about a couple minutes left, so I'll ask a quick question. Your father was county executive for almost 8 years. Are there times on the campaign trail where the best way to describe it, do you feel his presence? Are there times where you say something and say, oh my God, Dad said that? I remember when he was wherever several years ago.
Absolutely, every day of my life. You know, when I was born, my father was already in elected office. And growing up, I remember him telling me all the time, Karson, you have to act like there is a microscope pointed at the back of your head at all times. And I certainly was not the perfect son of a politician. But, you know, growing up with him in that role, it took me a while to even realize how it was such a different job than my friends' parents who might have worked for the post office or a trade union or were a doctor. And, you know, running now my own race without his presence, yet hearing so many stories so often from people that did experience his time in office, it'd be impossible to say I didn't, miss him and feel him every day as I'm charting such a similar path. And it's tough, it really is. There are so many times where I wish, if only I could ask him what he thought about this or how he would have dealt with that. But I think that's a pretty good thing, frankly, because I am not running to be him. And because he's not here, I get to take my own honest positions on a lot of things while still absorbing a lot of that goodwill that has strengthened me as a person and as a candidate. But yeah, his presence is felt. I feel it right now. In fact, every interview, because I remember his interviews. He used to drag me to the TV station, to the radio station, and we'd hear him talk. And again, often not the perfect son of a politician. Maybe I'd be making noise in the background or something. But I think it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Thank you again for your time and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks a lot, John. Keep it up. You are the man.
Thanks again.